Well, Charles, today we have with us a special guest who we actually both met this summer, I believe. Um, she's more famous than both of us, but hopefully we'll be able to ride her coattails after this podcast. But joining us today on White Collars is Gia Chacón, who's the founder of For the Martyrs, which is the leading voice for the persecuted Christians worldwide. Gia actually introduced me to the idea, which is the fact that Christians are the most persecuted religion in the world, which I can't believe. I just never realized that. She's worked extensively on the ground across the Middle East, advocating for religious freedom, human dignity, and providing direct support for communities suffering for their faith. And her leadership continues to mobilize, as she says, awareness and action in response to the global crisis of Christian persecution. So, Gio, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about
We're
this.
very excited.
Yes. So it's really appropriate, Gia, that you spend so much time with Christians who are persecuted because our listeners feel like they're Christians who are persecuted. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's a tough joke to open up with because you actually deal with very serious things, Gia, right? So,
Yeah.
but before we get into what you do and what that's going on in the world, tell us a little bit how you ended up in this space, right? How did Gia become the martyrologist? Is that the word?
That's a new label for me. I like it. So I really have my grandmother to thank because my grandmother has been working in international crisis relief now for just about 40 years. And growing up, I remember hearing stories of the mission trips that she would take. She actually was a co-worker of the Missionaries of Charity and knew Mother Teresa. She has letters from Mother where they were discussing different trips and works that my grandmother was doing as part of being a co-worker of the Missionaries of Charity. So I grew up hearing those stories. I also heard the stories of my grandmother smuggling Bibles into communist China and actually being friends with a pastor who was imprisoned in communist Romania for over 13 years. So I hearing those stories, I was familiar with the idea that Christians were persecuted. Of course, like many people, I didn't know the scale of Christian persecution, and I didn't really realize that it was still happening in the age that we're living in now. So when I was 20 years old, I was working my dream job. I was, on the outside, very happy, but I felt like there was something more for my life. And my mom always told me that God has a special calling for me. So eventually I started kind of questioning, what is that special calling? Is it just to work in corporate cosmetics, which is what I was doing at the time, or is there something more? So I ended up praying and I asked God for a sign. And I said, Lord, I know anyone who is in you is a new creation, and I want that new creation life. And long story short, my life got turned upside down. And I ended up calling my grandma and I said, do you have any trips coming up? I really just wanted to get out of town and reset, maybe experience some culture. And she said, yes, we have a trip to Egypt and it's coming up and you're welcome to come. So 2 weeks later, I was in Egypt and it was there for the first time in my adult life that I met Christians who were persecuted for their faith. And it just absolutely rocked my world. So from that trip, I began traveling. And then 3 years later, I founded my own organization to aid the persecuted church.
What I'm really interested in that first experience because I think growing up in the United States, it's a very cushy life, and like my understanding of Christian persecution, at least like in America, like to localize it, was just like I live in Connecticut, which is a very it's a progressive state, and so the laws are usually anti freedom, religious freedom, and so like yeah, but also it was just like, abortion laws, and I remember the big thing was like HIPAA, like not allowing your priests to know who's in the hospital, and then like the mandates, like the famous case of the Little Sisters of the Poor, making hospitals violate their conscience of abortions and providing contraceptions and stuff like that. So like my experience like that was like Christian persecution, and it maybe is in a very minimal form, but so like going from like where Christianity in America growing up, I would say was pretty popular, maybe not Catholicism, in mainstream. Like, what was that like to like experience like people who were their lives were being threatened to just go to church?
I mean, to say culture shock is a complete understatement, but what it did was it really convicted me. Um, you know, so being 20 years old, coming from, yes, a very comfortable, comfortable Christianity. I was going to church on Sunday with my family. God knows the last time I went to confession, and I just wasn't really living my life as a Christian, but I considered myself to be. And when I met people that were willing to lay down their life for Christ, and that the reality of persecution, that to be Christian meant to risk death in some cases, I thought to myself, how can I just be taking my faith for granted? But it also, it opened up this curiosity of how many people are suffering and how prevalent is this issue? Because at the time, I mean, it was 2017, so kind of like the end of ISIS, and I had heard the stories of the Christian genocide that ISIS was campaigning, but my understanding was that was the worst of it, and that was really the extent of it, aside from things like what you're mentioning, um, Father. So hearing those stories, and particularly, I met this family from Upper Egypt, and so these are Coptic Christians, and it's like like the Orthodox Christianity that's historic to Egypt. And they told me a story that they had this group of young men that were going into the desert. They have a ton of amazing monasteries in the deserts of Egypt. So they were going there for a retreat. And as they were on their way, ISIS affiliates in Egypt entered the bus, demanded that they convert or that they would be killed. And every single one of the young men refused to convert, refused to renounce Christ, and they died um, because of it. And when I was talking to these Christians, the way that they spoke about the martyrdom of these young men, yes, they were devastated, but they were so proud that they stayed faithful until the very end. And it just completely changed my life. And in that moment, actually, in Egypt, I said, Lord, I do not want to live another day not fully in service to you and not taking my faith seriously. So I rededicated myself to the Lord, came home, went to confession ASAP, by the way. I scheduled an appointment with a priest. I was like, I need to get a lot off my chest. And yeah, it was the pivotal moment, and I never turned back.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. No, it is. That's a very impressive story, right? To be able to hear and see that firsthand, right? I think for so many of us, the Christian persecution is, as removed, right? Or it's something that's on the local news, maybe if it gets any coverage, and then you turn it off and go back to eating your soup or whatever people eat for dinner. And so, but I think to recognize that there is the awesome answer that the martyrs have. I remember Cardinal O'Malley. I once heard him give a homily, and he talked about when it was actually at the catacombs in Rome where a lot of early Christian martyrs were. And the passage, I can't remember if it was from Ruth, right there, God is my God, but he talked about that, and he went through the persecution that the early Christians went through, and how we're in the catacombs praying among their tombs, and how the same God that they died for is our God, right? And that's the same beliefs. And it was really an inspiring moment, because I think so often we can put them on a pedestal, particularly if they're, it's geography away or time further back, right? But Gia, how has not martyrdom, but Christian persecution changed, right? I mean, it's kind of always been with us, but what are the recent trends, Gia, that you're seeing, that you're understanding and documenting and being able to share with the world? Because is it the same? I mean, it's not quite the same. We're not in coliseums anymore, or maybe we are. I don't know, Gia. Enlighten me on what's going on. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Charles, excellent point, and thank you for bringing up the early church, because I think so many of us, especially Catholics and maybe other, of the more like historic rites, like Eastern Orthodox communities, when we think of persecution, we think of the early church, and we think of all the saints and the martyrs that gave their lives, or were persecuted under the Roman Empire, and maybe under like the Islamic Crusades in that era. We don't think of it as something we don't think of it as an issue of now. But the reality is that there are actually more Christians being persecuted today than any other time in church history. There are more martyrs for the faith today than even in the times of the early church. So what does that look like? To share some statistics, there are now over 380 million Christians worldwide who face persecution because of their faith. Does that mean that across the board it's Islamic jihad? Not necessarily. So for example, in Egypt, yes, they have smaller, more isolated terror attacks, but Christians living in Egypt also live as second class citizens, so they're being persecuted in a more systemic way versus ISIS or another Muslim Brotherhood attack. In places like China, Christians are monitored by the government. So there's a legal version of Christianity, and then there's illegal Christianity. And China uses the church and all of religion as an opportunity to control the people. And just in recent years, we've actually had the CCP go into the gospel and change scriptures so that it aligns with the communist approved version of Christianity. And probably the most devastating and issue that's the world is really paying attention to in terms of Christian persecution right now, there is an ongoing genocide of Christians in Nigeria. This year alone, over 7,000 Christians have been killed. And to share some perspective, in the time that ISIS campaigned genocide against Christians, in all those years, it was roughly 5,000 Christians that were killed in Iraq and Syria in the entirety of the time that ISIS had that reign. So there have been more Christians killed in Nigeria this year alone. So those are just some numbers, but it's not just in the Middle East. It's not just in China. Christian persecution is global and it's increasing every single year.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, like you said, it puts it in perspective. I think and it's crazy that something like this gets so politicized. And I think in one way, rightly so, everyone's focus is on the Middle East, especially between Gaza, Palestine, and Israel. And um, this idea of I'm wondering as well too, like this idea of like interreligious dialogue, and how that impacts it, because we're very afraid, I think, as Catholics, to criticize Islam, and we're also very, very even more afraid, everyone, of being accused of anti-Semitism. Um, but I think, and those are noble things, right? I think we should respect the faith of the righteous faith of believers. But I think that comes at the expense of standing up for ourselves. Um, like Christians in Israel can't practice their faith. They can't go to the sacred sites. And even in Egypt, like that is a holy site for Christians, right? It's where our Lord was spent his early days of childhood, where Saint Joseph protected our Blessed Mother, right? The Holy Family was there. And so I think it's to me, it's crazy that and the fear of not offending anyone, that we can't stand up for Christianity, at the fear of being called an anti-Semite or an Islamophobe. And so I wonder, like, what your experience like that has been, of just saying like this is caused by Islam. Not that uh, I know maybe our Jewish brothers and sisters are not persecuting us, but making it difficult to pray in certain sites to certain sects of Judaism, right? Even I'm trying to watch my words here, right? Because I'm just because the comment sections and all those things. So I'm just wondering what that experience too of your work has been.
To be fair, you could watch your words as much as you could possibly, figure out how to be careful, but your comment section is going to be crazy no matter what. I mean, every time we say Christian persecution, there's someone saying something about Israel, something about the Jews, or they're calling us Islamophobic. So I have actually really made an effort to advance interreligious dialogue. And I'm weary of Christians and the movement that I'm seeing in the United States to hate Muslims as a whole, or to blame Muslims for everything bad that's happening to Christians. I think that it's important to remember that it's actually Muslims who are the greatest victim of Islamic extremism. And extremism is is the enemy of all people of faith. So we can actually accomplish more by building bridges between Muslims and Jews than we can by engaging in what I would call like these holy wars. I mean, when we have Christians in the United States coming out and saying so many horrible things about all Muslims, generalizations about, like that all Muslims want to XYZ and that radical Islam is the ultimate end for all Muslims. I actually disagree with that. And I came to change my opinion because I once had that, same outlook. And it was after traveling to so many, actually over 20 countries. I've traveled to countries throughout the Middle East over 20 times, done so much work with different leaders in both the Jewish and Muslim nonprofit space that my thinking on this has really developed. And I think what Islamic extremist organizations and groups would like is for Christians and Muslims to hate each other, to believe that there is a holy war that they are, propagating, and to keep us in a state of fear. What they don't want is for Muslims, Christians, and Jews to be connected in our shared humanity. So I'm wary of this like rise in, I wouldn't even call it anti-Islamic sentiment. I think it's straight up hatred for Muslims. In terms of what's happening in Israel, it's not persecution, it is intimidation. I think that it's important to combat it and to be honest about what's happening. And I think that we can call out Islamic extremism, call out what's happening in Israel for what it is without engaging in this like stereotypical, like holy wars, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point, G. And I think, yeah, there's what we have in common that we can work together on, right? And recognizing that, radical Islam, right? It does affects people who are, of all faiths, but it does affect Muslims, right, disproportionately too, because it's their countries, right, where they're having this impact in the Middle East. And so I'm curious. So you have an organization called For the Martyrs, right? Which I think is really. I mean, I see a lot of it on Instagram, right? Which is always good. And you remind me, like, I'll see a lot of frivolous cats like playing with something, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Gia, this is what's going on. And it like kind of forced me to sit up straight, which is good though, Gia, because I think it's so easy to kind of park it somewhere else. But so your organization's For the Martyrs, tell us more about what you do specifically, right? What kind of messages you're trying to bring and how you bring it and how you got it to grow and what's your audience, what's your following. We want to hear about this organization that's doing a lot of great work.
So when I first started traveling with my grandmother, after that first trip, we were doing a lot of work in the Middle East, but not all of the work that we were doing was with persecuted Christians. Every trip that I took with my grandmother's organization, we had an opportunity to sit down and speak with Christians who had suffered atrocities because of their faith. So when I was having conversations with Christians from Iraq who fled ISIS, or Christians from Syria, continued conversations with Christians from Egypt, I began doing research into the reality of persecution. And when I began to understand the scale, that again, it wasn't just in the Middle East, that it was also in China, it was in North Korea, it was in South America even. There's right now, there are laws in Mexico that are being introduced that are going to heavily restrict priests, specifically priests in the Catholic Church's ability to speak freely. So as I was doing this research, I began asking myself, if Christians are the most persecuted religious group, if there is an increase in Christian persecution every single year, why are we not talking about this in every single parish, every single Bible study? Why is this not being treated with the same level of urgency as every other human rights crisis? So in response to my own question, I founded For the Martyrs to raise awareness about the crisis of Christian persecution, advocate for religious freedom, and provide aid to suffering Christians. But really at the heart of what we do is we are trying to inspire a movement for the persecuted church, where we're waking up, Christians of all denominations to not only recognize what's happening, but also feel a personal stake and feel connected to our brothers and sisters who are being persecuted.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, like you said, like why aren't we talking about it? I think part of it is ignorance, um, and maybe a desire to not believe it. Um, like nobody wants to believe that they're the victim if we're really honest with ourselves. Uh, uh, Maybe
I
not
don't
so
know.
much.
I think it's popular to be a victim these days. I think if you can pull the victim card, people want to pull it, but
Well, also Christians have never really been successful at being the victim, right? Like even in Rome,
true.
it's like that we became the most popular thing, right? It's like we're the last religion that it's kind of cool to make fun of. And so when we cry out, I mean, we've seen it. What CNN denies, right? That there's anything going on in Nigeria. So it's like, we cry out, we try to say things, and everyone's like, oh, whatever. Those Christians are back at it again. But so you mentioned earlier that you left a job and a career to kind of start this. So how do you like support yourself, and like what that leap of faith must have been huge. And so what was your encouragement to kind of pursue this full time?
So I was able to get a job, I mean, immediately with my grandmother's organization. And she really actually mentored me for as much as I was like traveling and it was very cool experiences. I was learning how to run a nonprofit organization. And part of that experience was learning that even though it's a nonprofit, it has to run like a business. I mean, there has to be infrastructure, there has to be income, there's budgeting, there's planning. So that experience with my grandmother was really invaluable. That being said, when I started For the Martyrs, it was December 2019. So it was right before the world shut down. I mean, it was like, I remember like we started For the Martyrs in 2019 and it was like immediately successful on social media. And I think I was kind of ahead of a like curve where I understood the power of the power of the internet for human rights issues and for nonprofits. Like we don't have to run a nonprofit and our Instagram look like a boring newsletter. Like we can be involved in trends and like figure out how to share our message in a way that's compelling. Um, uh, all that to say that despite that, when we founded right before COVID, I was like, oh my gosh, God, what have you allowed me to do? Because not only did I quit my corporate job, it's now 3 years later, and I quit my job with my grandmother to focus full time on For the Martyrs. And I really have to say that trusting in God, trying to be resourceful and not taking no for an answer goes very far. And I'm very lucky that I had a close friend that was willing to kind of be my angel donor and give us a nice chunk of change to really get our mission started. But after we had that initial start, we focused most of our fundraising through social media. And it was kind of a difficult like transition because I was like freaking out because of COVID. The world shut down. We had to postpone our first event. And I was praying and I was like, okay, God, what can we do to make sure that this isn't a failure from the start? And one of the things that COVID gave us was a captive audience. So everybody was at home, they were on their phones. And I really just began strategizing and using that captive audience as a way not only to get the message out, but also to start fundraising. And that's how we were able to start in the beginning.
That's great. And I think, yeah, it's sort of like sometimes the greatest challenges become the great opportunities, right? Yeah, you have that captive audience where people, there's less competition, right? Because no one's going anywhere or doing anything. We're all stuck at home waiting out the pandemic. But I liked how you were talking about you have to adopt the business model, right? And a business approach, right? And try to do things at a high caliber, right? The design, right? The production. It can't be, it has to be serious to be taken seriously, right? Because, it's easy to record something on an iPhone, right? Which actually has gotten better and better, but, like trying to have that serious production value. And that's what I see. It's funny because when I first met you, I'd heard about you from a mutual friend of ours. And then when we met you, and then now I sit and see you on social media, I'm like, this is like a real deal person, Gia, right? Like, I mean, not that you weren't a real deal when we met you, but it is impressive to see the clout that you have, the following that you have, and the quality of the content that you produce. That's, really really getting the message out there and to a broad audience, and also understanding that, to the point, it's, we can have a talk in a parish, right, which parishes are great and talks are great, but how do we get outside the parishes, right? And that's where I think you do some really interesting work, because you're wherever there's the internet, right, and short of the Chinese blocking it in their country or whatever, right, that you can get your message out. Now, what has been your biggest lessons learned of things that kind of surprised you as far as running the organization, but also what were kind of some of the challenges that you didn't expect right away?
I have learned so many lessons. I mean, I'm not joking when I say you have to run a nonprofit like a business. And I think like if anyone's ever, had the idea of starting a nonprofit, we think of it just that, I don't know, that it's somehow different, or that it shouldn't be like, with a traditional business model. But I think part of the reason why so many nonprofits fail from the start is because there is not that preparation for what it really takes to keep an organization going, much like keeping a business going. But I think the number one thing that I have learned is, and this is maybe just like a personality thing, but I'm one of those people that I have this almost like blind belief in my idea, and I think it's going to work out. I don't take no for an answer, and I'll listen to your advice. I don't know if I'm really going to take it, and the biggest lesson that I've learned is that I have to be teachable, and I need to have humility, and mentors are a very good thing. And I think at some point there was a very difficult moment in, it was kind of like a pivotal moment of the organization where, are we going to be stuck at this, small point, or are we going to have the capability to grow? And in order to kind of reach that next level, I needed to bring in mentors and advisors. I needed people to look at everything that I was doing, and I needed to be open to criticism. So becoming teachable was a big lesson. But now I'm so thankful because I have so many incredible, actually CEOs, pastors, even attorneys who I take in. I take their advice, and I listen to, basically, I mean, when they tell me that I'm wrong, I listen to it now. So that was a big lesson. And I think like if you whether you're starting a nonprofit or you're starting a business, I think that one of the things that you have to learn is to be able to be teachable, and that your way is not always the right way.
Yeah, I think that's important too, because right, like the businesses that are successful are scalable, right? So you're able to grow and survive in different markets and atmospheres. And if it's a cult of personality, or then it becomes really difficult to run and change. And mentors are all the rage now, which I'm a big fan of it. I actually do something with a Catholic psych organization that bases their model on mentorship and life coaching. But I think that humility is so, like, that's probably like the biggest hurdle to jump over, right? Of maybe like, but it's good. It's a good balance that you're striking, right? Between like, my idea is good and I have that confirmation and I believe that this is the will of God. But maybe I'm not seeing the whole picture, right? Maybe I'm not seeing how this will be received, or how I can make this grow, or connections that I can make. And so people have that experience and they can give it to you. Then they empower you to spread that out to your whole audience and to grow. So how has your growth been? I mean, I follow you on social media, so you have one new follower in the last few months. But
Every
like,
follower counts.
as I'm learning on my own beginning stages of Instagram. So like, how has that growth, like, has it surprised you? How have you kind of continued to grow? And what were some of the advice of the mentors that you took and you were like, this was like a game changer?
Yeah. So the growth in the beginning definitely surprised me. I mean, it was just incredible to see how seriously we were taken from the very beginning. I mean, and I mean, to Charles' point of like, if you want to be taken serious, you have to be serious. And I think that one of my good instincts from the beginning was that, like, this has to be legit. It needs to be on the level, so that people can see that this issue is a serious issue. So from the beginning, we were taken very seriously. And I remember there was like my dream partner organization, Open Doors USA. I mean, this is like a $53, probably more now, $53 million organization. It had been around forever. The CEO, who's a friend of mine, he's no longer the CEO, but at the time, his name is David Curry. And I was like, if I could just have a coffee with David Curry and become friends with Open Doors USA, that would be like my ultimate goal. And basically, within 8 months of founding For the Martyrs, we had connected with Open Doors, and they became one of our first real sponsors to our next big event. So it was incredible. And I'm still blown away to this day about the organizations and institutions that come alongside what we're doing. I was just at Southeastern University in Florida, where I was guest lecturing and making plans for the future with some of their administration about how we can partner more intentionally, how the university can partner more intentionally with the mission of the organization. So it's incredible. In terms of mentorship and what was something that I really took to heart, it has to do honestly more with like infrastructure and how we're running the organization. So I won't bore your your audience
No,
with
they
that.
love it. That's what they're here for.
Yeah. So yeah, it was just growing up. I mean, I think another thing that I learned is that even though I started my organization when I was 23 years old, and I think I kind of got away with some things in the beginning because I was young. I think as much as you would think that you won't be taken seriously when you're young, I think that actually it was more interesting that we were doing what we were doing because I was only 23. But I learned very quickly that if you are going to play ball, like, with all these organizations and institutions, even like contractors, they are not going to treat you like a 23-year-old. They're going to treat you, just like everybody else in the business world. And so I think that was like a little bit of a harsh reality is learning that business really is just business at the end of the day. And I think that was a maturity lesson for me, which is good. Now I'm like, I have
Yeah,
like,
come at me. Come at
a
me.
different mindset. Yeah, I have a different mindset now, but when I was 23, you can imagine like entering into huge contracts, with very serious companies. So it was scary, but now I'm like grateful for it all and used to it.
Do it in your
Yeah.
sleep, right? Just sign the
Yeah.
contract, right? So yeah, hardball, right?
Yeah.
You can play it. So yeah, no, it is. Yeah, and I think there's kind of pros and cons to right, kind of starting something when you're young because you do get the benefit of the doubt in some respects, right? But people can also look past and say, oh yeah, this is it. But also like it's if you're in college and you ask to get a selfie with the vice president or something, that's cool. If you're like older, it's like okay, and then nothing against older people, but like I remember my mom, she told me she had kids, so and one of the reasons why she did is so she could like have us go up to celebrities or something and like take a picture of us with them versus like her being like this mom going up and
Yeah.
wanting a picture with a celebrity. So but that's enough of my persecution complex that we're working through. We're here to talk about the exciting things. But yeah, G, I think you talked right about humility and right, there's a TED talk of a guy who's I can't remember his name. It's where he says you have to be humble, hungry, and smart, right? And so I think you've talked about the humble aspect, right? Being able to have those mentors and to realize that there's a lot you can learn from different people. And you're clearly very smart and very hungry, right? But could you talk a little bit more to that? Sort of like where's the drive and the energy coming from to do this every day? Because you do it with a very serious topic, very it's one thing to say like I want to go play with puppies all day. It's like, oh well, everyone wants to do that, right? Like that's an easy, I will get behind that. But like, oh, you're dealing with really heavy stuff. But also, how do you stay up to date? How do you stay informed? How do you, because there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstandings, or there's competing narratives coming out of these countries sometimes. So how do you kind of make sure that you're well informed and well grounded of what's the real situation?
Starting with your how do we stay well informed question. I mean, this is one of the most important things to me is that whatever we are reporting is true, that the source is trustworthy, and that we are never exaggerating any of the statistics that we share. I mean, sometimes we've come under criticism because people are saying, oh, well, this is trending. Why isn't March for the Martyrs talking about it? Or Gia, how come you're not talking about XYZ? And oftentimes, if we're not commenting on something, it's because we don't have trusted sources. We don't know how accurate the reporting is. So you're right. Things go viral on social media and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. So, how we get our information, number one, we look at the reports of our partner organizations who have well established research arms. So, Open Doors is one of them. But we also look at the United States Commission for International Religious Freedom. We look at the reports of the State Department. And then we hear firsthand accounts on the ground. So, there are pastors that we're in contact with, a lot of priests that we work with that will give us the update from their firsthand perspective. So we take the first-hand testimony and also the DC research reports and blend those and figure out how to package it in a way that's compelling for our audience. And honestly, that is actually what keeps me going. Hearing from people on the ground what they're going through, hearing the stories directly. I mean, I think it's really easy to, when we're talking about persecution and we hear numbers like 380 million, I think it's easy for us to just glaze over that. And even myself, sometimes I get used to sharing these statistics. But whenever I talk to someone who has been persecuted, when I talk to someone in Nigeria or Egypt or Iraq, and they give us the update on what's happening, whether it's a tragedy or an improvement, because again, we want to support the persecuted. Those stories are what keeps me going, and it makes everything else worth it. Whether it's running the business or, getting kind of almost desensitized to the difficult things that we have to read every day, that human connection is what makes all the difference and keeps me going.
Yeah, you talked earlier about how that impact on the trip to Egypt with your grandmother, and I'm wondering if there's like another story that sticks out in recent memory of, because you don't just do this from afar, you also travel and you go and experience this firsthand, and which I think is super important and vital. So is there like a story or like a family or a person who like sticks out to you, that kind of has been part of that like hunger and drive?
So honestly, there are so many stories, but one that really stays with me, I met this young refugee from Iraq when I was in Jordan, and her family suffered directly under ISIS. The story was that in the middle of the night, ISIS came into the family's home, asked them if they were Christian, demanded that they convert, and upon their refusal of converting and renouncing the faith, they killed her brother in front of the family and kidnapped her sister. And they gave the family 24 hours to convert or they were going to come back. And rather than convert or, like after seeing this, like tragedy and violence that we can't even really begin to comprehend because we haven't lived it. So I can't even imagine what it was really like for them to have experienced that and know what was coming. And in that moment, rather than maybe do the easy thing, which is like, oh, I'll just convert from the outside and keep my faith internally. Or, like, what's the harm if I renounce Christ, but on the inside, I'm still a Christian? Rather than do that, they fled to Jordan with nothing but their passports in their hands in the middle of the night. And speaking to that young girl who was around my age at the time, absolutely beautiful. I mean, if she was like, walking down any street, you wouldn't even begin to imagine that she had suffered these atrocities. So hearing that story and then also hearing how she spoke about it, that it was worth it to her, that there was nothing that she wouldn't suffer if it meant that she could keep her faith. I think of that story almost every single day, and it's one that I go back to because it's not just her story. It really is a reflection of the persecuted church. That's how Christians who are persecuted view their faith, that there's nothing that they wouldn't sacrifice if it meant that they can keep their faith.
Yeah, no, gee, it's a really heart wrenching story to think about how people are living this today, right? And it's not just some sort of Sound of Music, oh, idyllic running over the mountains in Austria, right? That these are people that are fleeing with just the things that they can carry in their hands, in their pockets. And I think that it also reflects on kind of a disparate. There's sort of the martyrdom, right, that we hear, obviously, where people shed their lives for their faith, but there's also the witness, right, which I think, right, Father, correct me if I'm wrong, like being a confessor, right? I've also heard it called like white martyrdom, where you suffer but short of death, right, which is, I guess, is still challenging.
Father and I discussed this.
No,
we
no,
see differently
Oh, you
on
see
this
differently.
issue
Oh,
of
well, let's
martyrdom.
get a little. Let's see what are your
no,
two
no,
perspectives. Gia's correct one, and Father's
no.
misunderstood one.
Now I have to
So
make a point of clarification because it was we were talking about Maximilian Kolbe, I think, right? Or he John Paul II
Yeah,
called him
yeah,
because he didn't die for the hatred of the faith, but he died as a martyr of mercy or martyr of charity. So there's a different qualification. You do wear
charity.
red on the feast day of Maximilian Kolbe, but then you have confessors, which are the white martyrs, which they didn't die for hatred of the faith; they died naturally, but they confessed and witnessed to the faith in their lives. So that's the distinction that I'm all for. I did say John Paul II, he did a lot of things. One of the things he did was expand the definition and speed up the canonization process for a lot of people, which is not necessarily a terrible thing. I mean, there's a new movie that came out about Maximilian Kolbe's witness, The Triumph of the Heart, which is, I haven't seen it, but I've seen lots of clips and I've talked to a lot of people who've seen it. And it's amazing. And I've been trying to get at the parish, but yes. So Charles, your point about white martyrs who are not confessors,
yes,
they're
thank you.
not white people.
They're not. So it goes. There's red martyrs, right, who were killed for hatred of the faith, and then white martyrs are confessors, or is there
No,
something now you're splitting?
confessors.
So confessors
Yes,
and white martyrs are the
there's
same.
the new category was
Confessors.
for Maximilian Kolbe was a martyr of charity, not
So he's a red martyr. He's not.
maybe let's just do this,
yeah.
Gia. Let's define martyrdom. Like what? Because no, this isn't it.
We should have done this at the beginning. Maybe everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, that's what you've been talking about."
Because we went back and forth on this, Gia, and I think it's an important conversation. And you know what, I'm I'm appreciative to your point of view because I don't think I have a settled position on this, but it came up a lot with Charlie Kirk and with the students at Annunciation who were shot and killed at mass, and so the question is like the word martyr is being thrown around, which I think is good that it's being talked about. But as a philosopher, we have to define our terms. So yeah, what is a martyr? I would say you're more of an expert on this than I am.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I certainly have not studied theology. But the definition of martyrdom that I like to share and to really kind of help everyday Catholics and Christians internalize it is that martyr means witness. So Charles, to your point, and what was witness? I mean, in the time, like if we go back to scripture, we have Stephen the proto-martyr. So he in scripture is called Stephen the witness. So in the original translation, martyr didn't mean to die for your beliefs. It meant to bear witness to the truth. And the early church, all the witnesses who bore witness to the truth or gave their testimony of Christ, it meant that they were going to be put to death. So over time, it adopted the meaning to die for one's faith, but martyr truly means witness. So another lesson that we can learn from the persecuted church is that what I learned personally from specifically the story that I told of this young Iraqi refugee girl, I learned that we're all called to that kind of witness. Does it mean that we're necessarily going to lay down our life? God, I hope that we're all spared from that. But we are called to have this radical faith where we are willing to lay down our life for Christ in the everyday sense, where we're sacrificing, maybe it's smaller things or things that American Christians have to face to stay true to the faith. And I think that that's something that we can all learn from the persecuted church is what it really means to be faithful and what it really means to be a witness of Christianity and the gospel.
Well, this kind of we've kind of been touching upon this, and I'm interested in your perspective as well as like because you talked about right like what if I interiorly still hold Jesus but exteriorly just deny it to preserve my life, and I think that's not something that you just like decide in the moment, right? But that's something that you're prepared for. This was exaggerated in that Martin Scorsese movie Silence, where it's different. It's a spoiler alert. It's different than the book.
Yeah, the spoiler because someone spoiled this for me, so I just wanted to tell everybody if you've not seen Silence, like just skip 30 seconds ahead because it ruined the whole movie for me. So this is not like a casual spoiler alert. Yeah, it's like this. Yeah, it's like The Sixth Sense. This is a big deal. So all right, you may proceed, Bob.
But so the priest apostatizes at the end of the movie, but there's allusions to the fact that he kind of kept his faith. Um, but I think this is something that like you don't just like it doesn't happen in the moment, but you prepare for it. And so I think this is something we experience every day as Christians in at work, in the public sphere, on Instagram and social media, is like what is my public persona and what is my interior disposition, and they have to match, right? Because that otherwise, if like I believe in Jesus Christ, but I'm afraid to proclaim His name to witness to Him, then the question is like, am I really a believer? And like, what am I afraid of? So I don't. You've seen the stories, and you've helped. You've supporting all these things. So, and living this yourself, your own conversion, right? How is that experience to live the interior life exteriorly?
I think one question we have to ask ourselves is why are we so afraid? Like, I mean, it's what I call the paradox of persecution overseas, especially in, for example, like a place like North Korea, where even having a scripture written on a piece of paper or professing, I believe in God, is a sentence to life in a labor camp, not just for yourself, but for your family and for your friends. So, what happens in countries like North Korea, China, throughout the Middle East, where Christians face such serious persecution, is they have to make a choice. To be Christian means perhaps I'll be faced with death, but it means that I have to really believe everything that I say that I believe. And when you do make that choice, if your faith is true, you sincerely, with your whole heart, mind, and strength, believe that Jesus Christ is Lord, it changes how you live. And I think that this is really why the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, because this unbelievable witness, this unbelievable faithfulness to the gospel and to Christ, people see that, and it has a very like convicting and I would say like evangelical aspect to it, where they want to know more. Well, if this person is willing to sacrifice everything for their beliefs, maybe that belief is true. And for us as Christians in the United States, where we're not facing death, we're not facing, expulsion from our families or life in a labor camp, we have to ask ourselves, what are we so afraid of? And as hard as it is, and it's, like the lifelong conversion, and God gives us the grace, I think the only thing that we're really afraid of is judgment from our peers, and maybe being seen as, like an outcast or a little strange. And I would say that that is, first of all, I think that it's the enemy. But more than that, we have so much to gain by making the decision to live fully for Christ in every area of society. It doesn't just mean that you have to become a priest or a nun or, like go into the desert and like abandon your daily life. But imagine what it would be like if every Catholic truly lived as a Catholic in their everyday job. I mean, the world would be completely different. And we have so much more to gain living completely for Christ than we ever could gain by trying to censor ourselves to appease the world or to protect ourselves from minor judgments.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think, yeah, like maybe some people are too like, oh yeah, I could handle martyrdom, right? I liked, what was it? That was, I think, Thomas More. I don't know if this is attributed to him or one of the movies or something. But he's like, I'm okay with dying for my faith. I'm not ready to be tortured for it, right? Or he said, I'm not sure if I'm ready to be tortured for it. And like, as soon as they would bring out like the pliers for the fingernails, and be like, okay, let's time out. Like, let's have a chat. Which, whatever, you can have my passwords, you can have everything I want. Please don't take my fingernails out. But yes, and so but I think recognizing that there is that ordinary, martyrdom that we live, that is maybe not even torture, right? We're not getting beaten or, but there's these little opportunities for charity, for living out our faith. And if we don't do it because we're afraid of judgment, or we're not sure what people will think, or, we're like, oh, well, yeah, maybe I'll do that later. Or, I don't really have to do that. Right. But we are all called to our unique form of martyrdom. And that point that, the seeds of the church are the blood of martyrs, right? It's true, right? Where the church has been most persecuted. Nigeria is thriving, right? The church, right? It's got the highest mass attendance anywhere in the world. And it's not like just a weird fluke statistic. Like there's one parish and 3 Catholics. And so therefore, they're all at mass and it's 100% participation. But like, no, there's lots of Catholics and they're all in mass, right? And there's thousands of them getting killed all the time. And so, Gia, I'm curious from your own, experience, which martyr has been the most inspirational to you in your work?
Don't make fun of me. Don't drag me, but it's really Saint Stephen, the proto martyr. I mean, there's actually a story where when I was right before I started March for the Martyrs, I had been talking about Christian persecution online, and it was started becoming part of my brand because I had already um, kind of began, I guess, like a social media, but I also was speaking publicly at parishes and churches. Um, so anyway, before I started March for the Martyrs, and I really had a heart for the persecuted, I was actually in adoration and I was praying and I was asking God, what is your specific calling? I have such a heavy burden for the persecuted. And I was praying in adoration and I just opened my Bible and it was the story of Stephen. And so that obviously was like, okay, I took it as a sign. I don't know if that's too hokey, but I really believe that God was speaking to me that I was meant to do something specifically for the persecuted, and that word martyr was an important part of whatever it was that I was going to do. And then however many weeks later, I founded my organization For the Martyrs. So I constantly am asking for St. Stephen's intercession. And I go back to the story in scripture of Stephen's, not just his martyrdom, but the whole story of Stephen in scripture.
Yeah, I mean, he's the OG, right?
Yeah, the OG
And
martyr, exactly.
he was stoned, and
He was stoned, yeah,
Saul, later Paul, consented to it, right? Yeah.
approved
So,
of it.
whenever we
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
persecuted Christians, which I have to admit, I'm not doing it every day like you are, and I probably should, but I love to spread awareness of Ignatius Cardinal Kung, who was held in prison as a bishop in China, and the reason why I'm a big fan of him is when he was released from prison, he moved to Stamford, Connecticut, and his Requiem Mass was at the Basilica here in Stamford, and then now he's buried in California. But he is kind of like the face of the underground church in China, and he was held in prison and he was made a cardinal in pectore, which for those of you who've seen Conclave is not what the movie Conclave says. Um, he when he was released, it was John Paul II told him that he was made a cardinal. One of the commissions for the Secretary of State went to go visit China, and they had a dinner. They released Cardinal Bishop Kung from prison, and they hadn't realized, they weren't sure if he had apostatized or like done anything. And so at dinner, I guess it was customary to exchange songs, and Cardinal Kung stood up and sang the Tuas Petrus as a sign of saying, "I still believe Peter is the Pope." And everything. And um, it's crazy to think that, right, like that there's an underground church and a government sanctioned church. And I think one of the reasons I think Cardinal Kung's cause isn't being advanced is because it will slap the Communist Party in the face, and the Vatican China deal, which it's a whole nother podcast,
Truly.
uh, is Eh, don't get us started. But I think that idea of just like that faithfulness and that freedom. I think too of uh the movie A Hidden Life. Franz Jägersteiner, right? Is he's asked to denounce his faith, um and not be a conscientious objector. And the whole line of the movie, I'm spoiling a lot of movies today. That's the
Yeah,
second.
skip this one too if you want to know how that movie ends.
It's historical. Um he says, "Just sign this and you'll be free."
Mhm.
The Nazi officer, and Franz Jägersteiner says, "I'm already free." And I think just going all the way to that point of just like the, yeah, what does fear of judgment give me? And it's the, if I can get behind my stay in my pulpit for a little longer, it's one of the beatitudes, right? Blessed are the persecuted, and blessed are you when they hate you because they've hated me first. And if the world does not know you, it's because they do not know me. And so there's such a beauty. It's like it's a mysterious beauty of the life of the persecuted Christians, that the witness to the truth of the faith, right? That nobody dies for a lie, um, right? It's Charles. Do you know the Richard Nixon story? Watergate, how it made a Christian out of somebody.
One of the Watergate co-conspirators was not particularly religious, as far as I know, and in prison he became religious after Watergate because he said, however many people were in the Watergate, fiasco, he said we couldn't keep a secret for a couple weeks, and but the apostles, if they were making it up, right, they kept it till they were all killed except for one, John. Right. And I recently learned that the former emperor of the Central African Republic thought that he was the 13th apostle, but he was a little wacky. So don't take that. But just a fun fact, just probably there. But anyway, these all of our the founders of our church, right, went to their deaths. So, but Gia, I have a lightning round. This is something I do with guests that Father Lobster doesn't like. And so to close us out here, so I asked AI, if you heard me typing earlier, I was not trying to be rude, but I'm not as creative as the greatest, technology humans have come up with so far.
And this is what we're using it for.
First of all, me and Chad are besties.
All right. Yeah. All right. Coffee or tea?
Coffee. Red Bull.
All right. Most underrated
not
saint.
White Monster.
Oh, Red Bull.
Red Bull. Yeah.
Saint Red Bull's the most underrated saint.
No, certainly not White Monster. Okay. Underrated saint. I love Saint Rita of Kasha. I think she's not known enough. I mean, she's known, but I think she's underrated.
I have no idea who she is. I'm gonna have to Google her now.
There
All right. What one country you haven't visited but you need to? Italicize the need. So.
Ooh. I would absolutely love to go to Turkey or China.
Ooh, that's a fun one.
Yeah.
Best airport snack for a long trip?
Besides Red Bull?
Yeah.
Okay, this is so embarrassing, but I like those Archer's beef sticks. So those and like a little gluten-free cracker.
A gluten-free cracker is just a bag of air, right? Because no, sorry. All right, scariest place your work has taken you?
Iraq. I went to Nineveh, where ISIS
gosh.
campaigned genocide against Christians.
Wow, you're serious, Gia.
Experience.
So that's you rock because you went to Iraq.
Bad.
Take that one there. Book everyone should read once in their life. Yeah. Book everyone should read once in their life.
Besides the Bible.
Besides the Bible.
I think everybody should read the Catechism. I love the Catechism of the Catholic
Big fan.
Church.
All right, Chick-fil-A or In-N-Out?
In-N-Out. I'm Californian. Come on.
It's not even good. It's not even the best burger in California.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Which martyr would you most want to have dinner with?
Steve.
Yeah, Stephen.
Oh, don't put the answer
Yeah,
forward.
no, I was thinking Stephen, but I was trying to get more creative. But the true answer is Stephen.
Gotcha.
Yes.
And then last but not least, what Catholic stereotype is actually true?
Catholic guilt.
Oh.
I think
one.
Catholic guilt is totally true.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I think
It's a good thing
too.
to, yeah. So, but Gia, where can people follow you, stay in touch, understand what you're doing, and what's the best places to do all that?
So follow March for the Martyrs on Instagram if you want to stay connected to the work that we're doing. If you want to, even if you just want to keep up to date with stories and news, follow March for the Martyrs. Or you could go to our website, forthemartyrs.com. If you want to stay connected with me personally, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at genuinely Gia.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Gia, and we appreciate you sharing your expertise and background and what you're working on. And hope to have you back soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I think it was a great conversation with Gia, as every conversation is with Gia. But it's always good to learn about what she's doing, and it's good to learn about what she's doing and what's happening in the world. My biggest takeaway is I did not realize how prevalent Christianity was, and that there's so many Christian martyrs. Because you always hear the 20th century was like the worst century for martyrs. I'm like, okay, well, we did that, and now we're in this great era of peace. And there's a few hiccups and things, but it is so prevalent, and the stats on the millions of Christians who can't practice their faith. I think of a story, and this probably is something that someone else has said about something that I'm not too familiar with specifics, but I'll say it anyways, is that there was this man who was in a country, I think like China, where he couldn't practice his faith. And they had priests, which is you, Father Lomnitzer, who would come at, in the evening, in the odd hours to say mass in the house church. They have somebody out watching for the police to come and deal with it. And so they had a secret mass going, and the lookout says, "Oh, here they come." And so quickly they're packing everything up, rushing, and everyone gets out. But the police get in at the last minute, and they catch one of the guys. I can't remember his lookout. Someone involved with the the operation. And they knew that if they got the priest, they could shut it down because that was the center of the sacramental life. And so they um, they imprison him and they torture him and they're like really cruel to him. And he won't give up who the priest is or where he is, how to get a hold of him. And eventually they let him out after a brutal time. And then he comes out of the prison and he comes to the U.S. and he starts a retail operation of some sort. And he's loving it because he can go to mass every day and can do it publicly and he's not going to be taken away. And he then realizes, well, if I go to daily mass, I can't be open at the right time. And so he's like, well, I won't go to daily mass. I don't have to go to daily mass. I'll just stick with Sunday mass, and then I'll be open during the day, longer hours, to make more money for his family to help them out. And he does that for a little while. And then he's like, well, I could be open on Sundays. And he's like, but so I'll go to mass and then I'll open up. And then that way I can have customers and, service them and get some more money. And so he does that for a while. And he's like, wait, I could be open during mass. And then that way I can get even more customers and be more successful. And so he does that and he stops going to mass. And what the, communist authorities couldn't get him to do, right? The gentle whisper of kind of comfort and capitalism, as much as we love capitalism, but, it's got to be within a moral context, moral framework, right? That those temptations, that's what eroded his faith. It wasn't this. And this is a homily I heard from a very Orthodox priest. So that story. But it made me think about, yes, the importance to recognize that while we may not live, fortunately, with the direct implications of martyrdom, at least we have the opportunity to make sure that we're still keeping our faith in unique ways. So I hope that wasn't your takeaway, Father. Because
No, not even close. I have two takeaways to one up you. One profound and one maybe a little more worldly. I think the first takeaway is that like the interior and exterior split. Like martyrdom isn't just dying for the faith, but it's that interior resolve to exteriorly witness to what you believe, even at the cause of death, and how the martyrs and the sort of persecuted have the strength to do that unto death. And then here, maybe perhaps your average Catholic has a bit of a struggle with something that is not as threatening as death, right? Just like judgment, becoming a social pariah. And so that challenge that we all face is like, I think maybe we could put it this way. It's like, am I willing to die for my faith? Maybe, but am I willing to live for my faith? And then the second takeaway is more worldly, is that, the best way to run a nonprofit is to run it as a business. I think just like, and I think we learned that as I'm learning that as a parish priest, right? Like sometimes the parish has to operate as a business, not at the expense of the sacraments, but to promote the sacraments, right? Finances, budgets, all those things, and just like best practices. What you said earlier in the show was, to be taken seriously, you have to act serious. And so I think to meld the best of entrepreneurship with the cause is how we make things grow and be successful.
It's very important. Yes. So would you like to close this out here, Father?
Yes, as always, like and subscribe, follow us, hit the bell, as they say on YouTube. I don't know if that's applicable to things. Find us on the Veritas app and all the other apps you love and use. And until next time, work hard and pray harder.